Pro-Palestine protests have continually taken place in central London and across the country ever since the October the 7th attacks in Israel. What has also become clear with the rise of these protests is the increase in anti-Semitism. Police forces have been under extreme pressure to get control of the protests and the abuse. But does the answer lie in banning the protests completely? Well, journalist and author Ella Wheelan has written on the subject, and she joins me now. Welcome to the show.
Hi.
Ella, a lot of people are saying that Jewish people who are living in central London are very nervous about going into the centre of town at the moment and being accosted by certain individuals. We have seen overt expressions of anti-Semitism from a minority of the protesters. So what is the solution?
Well, number one, I think the solution is not to panic and call for censorship. And that's not me in any way trying to downplay the genuine feelings of members of the Jewish community, because we've all seen elements of those protests. It's not the whole protest, but significant elements of them that are just grotesque, threatening, nasty. You know, you've had scenes of individuals running down side streets saying that they want to find Jews, things like that, which is, it's not political, it's just intimidation and horrible. So the reason why I say don't panic is because I think what's happened is that there's been this sort of narrative painted that central London, or any sort of part of the area, is a no-go zone for Jews because of these individuals on the protests. And I think that's, one, not true, and two, not a great message to send to Jewish people, that there are no-go zones for them. We should actually be a bit calmer and say, number one, we should argue that the police do their job, but also let's not panic about this, because when we panic, we lose a sense of sort of rationality. And I think the censorship point that I made is probably the most important, because the way to fight anti-Semitism, which should be our number one priority, is to argue about it and to reveal the inadequacies in the arguments of not just those sort of Islamist tendencies in the protest, but the whole protest has a problem with anti-Semitism. They might not all be holding pictures of Netanyahu dressed up like an octopus and all these sort of overt expressions of anti-Semitism, but the general sense in the protest is, you know, commonly understood that Israel is committing genocide, that, you know, that it's a unique state committing unique evil, and all those things leads to a situation in which anti-Semitism grows. So you can't ban all of that. How do you deal with it? You have to argue against it. And that's asking the Jewish community, I know, after millennia of persecution, to say, OK, you're going to have to toughen up and deal with these horrible people yet again. I know that's not a small ask, but I think the only way for us to get out of a situation in which we keep repeating the mistakes of anti-Semitism is to deal with it head on.
I mean, there's a lot of arguments, aren't there, about the meaning of certain phrases. Phrases like from the river to the sea. Some of the people who chant it will claim that there's nothing anti-Semitic about that whatsoever, whereas a lot of members of the Jewish community would say that, of course, it is. There's the conflation of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, and there's debates surrounding all of this stuff. But are there any sort of clear-cut cases of overt anti-Semitism which is also threatening or harassing or bullying or whatever, which you would say, actually, that's when the police should step in?
I think the police should step in when there's a genuine threat of violence, incitement to violence, and when, you know, the law is broken in terms of harassment. You know, if you follow a Jewish man down the street and say, and point at them and shout at them repeatedly from the river to the sea, that's obviously stepping from political protest into the harassment of an individual. And I think you used the term clear-cut. I kind of think there can't be clear-cut lines to a degree in this, because more broadly, the sort of distinction between the freedom to protest, which is I will defend it till I die, which is a vital right in a democratic society, and wanting to take a stand against bigotry and persecution and racism, you know, that line, it has grey areas, and it's in the grey areas where we need to sort of be flexible, because, you know, we have had, in response to these really quite large pro-Palestine marches, a lot of them happening on weekends in central London, from, for example, some of the right of the Conservative Party, is to say just hit the ban button completely.
Yes.
Just, you know, give the police blanket new powers, you know, because, you know, the police are so good, just let's give them more powers. It's a terrifying prospect. The Lord Walney report, which was about sort of political violence, hinged off of some of the pro-Palestine sort of march, the context of that, and then started talking about, well, we should ban protest outside, you know, the Houses of Parliament because MPs are under such threat. So you can see how it starts to, the sort of the space of freedom of protest starts to narrow and narrow and narrow.
Yes.
And the reason why we can't say it's clear-cut, because there are always going to be nuances. I mean, you know, even the issue of the phrase "from the river to the sea," I find it hard in the current context to understand why someone would say it without understanding how it sounds,
yes,
how it offends the Jewish community.
Well, similarly, the phrase intifada, and a lot of people will say, oh, we just mean a peaceful struggle.
Yeah.
Of course, the last intifada, it wasn't people handing out flowers, was it?
No, and, you know, you can't help but compare it to, for example, there's no tolerance for someone saying, well, I used the N-word in a joyful way as a celebration. You know, it just doesn't happen because we understand that there's, you know what you're doing when you use that word. People know what they're doing when they use the phrase "from the river to the sea" or intifada. But do I want it to be banned?
Yes.
Do I want to go there to say that words are so offensive that that people need to be protected from them? No, because I'm a free speech absolutist, whether it's in relation to racism against black people, anti-Semitism against Jews, misogyny against women, all the rest of it. I think we need to just remember our principles. They're being tested at the moment because anti-Semitism is so virulent and obvious and yet so ignored by you know, lots of people in politics.
So you're saying even if there is a placard, say, that is overtly anti-Semitic, but it doesn't involve a threat, you would say that should be tolerated? It's
a disgusting sentiment, but it's part of political speech. There are lots of things that people think at the moment and say, whether it's in relation to Israel, Gaza, or whether it's in relation to some of the other more contentious issues politically that I would find offensive. I don't think we should be afraid of saying these things are offensive, and we should pass judgment, by the way.
Yes.
It's not that you say, well, this placard is allowed to stand and everyone leave them alone. You're not allowed to say anything. I would hope that, and I would want to put pressure on people on those protests to say it's your responsibility, like any of us who've ever organised a protest, it's your responsibility to turn around and look at the placards around you, and if someone's carrying something that you don't agree with, you don't kick them up the backside and get them arrested, but you say, hang on a minute, that's not what we think, and you have a row, and you hope that you persuade them to take it down. Because
we do see the sort of normalisation of some pretty ugly ideas in certain protests. We've seen signs in even protests amongst trans activists where there are signs saying decapitate TERFs and that kind of thing. In fact, some SNP politicians were photographed next to that placard. No one's looking around, or if they are looking around, they're just turning a blind eye. So you're saying that actually they have to sort of self-police? I think we have a responsibility that, you know, free speech in a free society means that you have a responsibility to self-police, but that you set the terms of the debate. The reason I have such an objection to police interference in political life, it's not because I have some kind of, you know, bug about the police, or that I think the government has no role at all in how, you know, social norms of society, but it's that it's a fundamentally undemocratic view. It's the idea that the public can't be trusted to have conversations about big issues, live world issues like what's happening in Israel and Gaza. What has to happen is the grown-ups, the police, the state, has to step in and stop us from talking to each other. And that, you know, obviously some of the behaviour on these protests is both violent and childish. You know, it's this kind of weird mix. But I think we have to defend the idea that it's us who set social norms. It's us that defend what is right and wrong. It's us that sort of, you know, defend our political views in the open public square rather than having the authorities come in and do it for us. Because if we give away that agency, I don't agree with the government, well, this current government, I don't agree with on anything, literally anything. So why would I give away, and, you know, you take your average police officer on the street, I'm sure I wouldn't agree with them either. So if you give away your agency of saying you decide what I should think, what I should hear, what I should engage with, then you've got nothing left. And there's something to be said for anti-Semites outing themselves, isn't there? Yeah, but also having their minds changed. I know that's a hard stretch to think of at the moment, because nothing, I hope, nothing would drive me, whatever context, environmentally or otherwise, to hold a placard saying death to the Jews or anything like that. But, you know, I don't think these people are unreachable. And I think actually there's a sort of a tight extremist section perhaps who are unreachable, but then there are supporters and apologists around them. I want to get at those people. I want to change those people's minds. Ella Wheelan, thanks so much for joining me. Thanks.